everyone, and welcome to Fresh from My Garden. These beautiful flowers have bloomed in our garden, and today I'm going to talk about a few plant care tips for these beautiful amaryllis lily flowers. Amaryllis lilies are a beautiful variety of lily flowers that bloom in different shades and colors, and this is the second color that I have in my garden. I have previously shared on my channel a time lapse video of the amaryllis blooms and how beautifully they bloom. And they take about 3 to 4 days for all these lilies to bloom together and form one bunch. So, as you can see, amaryllis lilies have 4 flowers that bloom from one stalk. It takes 3 to 4 days for all of these flowers to be in bloom once all the buds have been formed. There is a stalk that is formed in the middle of the plant, and from that stalk, there are 4 flowers that come to all 4 directions. As a bunch of flowers, they look really beautiful together, and they can also be used as a cut flower arrangement in our living space. Amaryllis lilies are flowering plants that usually bloom during the spring and summertime, and they are grown from bulbs. So, in this container, I have at least 3 to 4 bulbs that are growing, and there is still space for the bulbs to multiply and fill up the rest of the space in the container. So, whenever we are planting flowering bulbs, it is always better to plant multiple bulbs in one container so that we have a bigger show of flowers when they all bloom together. These plants can easily be grown from bulbs and don't need too much of care. So, this is a plant that I got from my parents' garden. So, they have a few containers that have these amaryllis lily bulbs planted in them, and these bulbs multiply over the years. So, as they multiply and fill out the container, we can repot them and then separate those bulbs to get more bulbs that we can plant in different containers or in different parts of our garden. Since all kind of flowering bulbs don't require too much of watering, the soil that we require for flowering bulbs are porous and well draining soil that have some mixture of sand, compost and regular gardening soil. These plants are currently in a container in the south side of our garden where it receives a lot of direct sunlight. But amaryllis bulbs can do well in spots even with partial sunlight. But if they are completely in shade, they might not bloom and we will only see the growth of foliage on these plants. But a few hours of sunlight during the day, maybe just 3 to 4 hours of sunlight, will be sufficient and these plants will still bloom in partial sunlight. Since these plants grow from bulbs and the bulbs hold moisture and water, these plants don't have to be watered every day. They can be watered once in 2 or 3 days, and that will be sufficient water for these plants. Too much excess watering can cause these bulbs to rot and decay quickly. Usually, amaryllis bulbs go into a period of dormancy during the cooler months or the winter period. So, during that time, we don't require to water them too much or even fertilize these plants. Springtime is the time when these plants start flowering again, and that is the time when we need to fertilize these plants. We usually fertilize our flowering plants with NPK granules or liquid seaweed fertilizer or even compost. So, a little bit of fertilizer is enough for these plants to bloom well. Bone meal is another important fertilizer that is great for flowering plants and helps them bloom well. Once in bloom, the amaryllis lily flowers stay in bloom and stay fresh for at least a couple of weeks before the flowers dry up and die back. And once the flowers dry up and die back, it should be pruned at the base of the stalk from which these flowers bloom. Make sure not to damage the bulbs or the foliage of these plants, and once the stalk is cut and removed, it will encourage new growth on these plants. The main pest problems seen on amaryllis plants are root rot and powdery mildew. And to prevent this, we should make sure that the foliage and the soil around the plant is not waterlogged and there is no excess moisture on these plants. So the foliage should always be kept dry and the soil should only have enough water to keep it moist, and it should never be waterlogged or soaking wet. This kind of soil and wet foliage causes the kind of root rot and powdery mildew problems that amaryllis lily plants are prone to. Propagating these plants are by removing the entire plant from the soil and dividing the bulb so that we can get more plants for our garden. So we do have a few containers in which we have these amaryllis lilies, and as I had mentioned earlier, I got these as bulbs from my parents' garden. So I have two colors that we have growing in our garden, one of which is from my parents' garden and the other is from my mother in law's garden. Both of these were propagated by dividing the bulbs from the containers in which they were growing in their gardens. Hope you enjoyed a view of these beautiful flowers from our garden. And since now springtime is begun and we are having warmer temperatures, we are expecting to see a lot more beautiful flowers in bloom, and we will share them with you in our videos and also through our Instagram. If you haven't already subscribed to my channel, please do support and subscribe to my channel, and do follow me on Instagram where I share regular updates from our garden. Please keep watching and do support us for more gardening related videos. Thanks for watching Fresh from My Garden.